It has now been officially 1 year since the beginning of the DCU, which kicked off with Creature Commandos, and because of this, I want to take the time to look back and reflect on the first year of the DCU under James Gunn and Peter Safran and give it an overall grade. For this video, we're going to be following a very simple grading criteria, which is going to involve 5 different categories graded from 1 to 100 and weighted based on importance. And that final combined score is going to correspond to the letter grade that we give the DCU for its first year. The 5 categories that we are going to be scoring are Creature Commandos, Superman, Peacemaker Season 2, the development of future projects, and finally an overall hype/vibes category, which I'm going to explain a little bit better once we get to that section. Now, even though I am the one grading this, and my opinion is obviously going to weigh pretty heavily in determining the final score for each category, I did want to take into account other external factors like overall reception, viewership, and box office, amongst many other things to remove some bias. I'll admit it's not perfect, and because of that, I would love to see what grade you would give the DCU's first year, whether you agree with me or not. But now to kick off the grading process, let's begin with the project that kicked everything off, that being Creature Commandos. Now, when it comes to Creature Commandos, I have to admit, this was probably the section I struggled the most with when determining an overall final grade. I mean, what do you do with a project that for the most part fulfills what it promised fans it would do, but ultimately had little to no overall impact due to its limited audience appeal? Obviously, before the release of Creature Commandos, we were not exactly sure where the story was going to go, but the overall tone and writing was about exactly what most of us thought we were going to get from an animated series written by James Gunn, featuring a bunch of mostly obscure characters that make the members of the Suicide Squad look like A-list celebrities. My opinion on the show falls in a very similar spot to the overall reception it got from fans, which was that for the most part the show was fun. There was some really good emotional moments, it was beautifully animated, and there was some great action, some cool characters that I personally would love to see more of in the future, like the Bride, G.I. Robot, Phosphorus, and at the time Rick Flag Sr., plus some really cool Easter eggs for the larger DCU that got you imagining what the DCU could be. But ultimately, even though I would consider the show to be good, it was probably the worst of James Gunn's work in DC or Marvel at the time, which was a title it would soon relinquish, but we'll get into that in a little bit. The audience appeal is something that was also a big topic of conversation, especially on social media, as during its release, it was not even the most popular animated superhero series. That title was comfortably held by your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, but honestly, I do think the show performed about as good as anyone could have hoped for an animated Creature Commandos series, a part of a universe that was just starting and needed to repair a brand that had absolutely lost all general audience interest due to almost a decade of releasing mostly subpar product. Now, I understand that's a low bar, and I do understand the argument that a lot of people have saying that a Creature Commandos project should have never kicked off the DCU, and I totally agree. But we are just grading Creature Commandos as a project, whether its quality was good and whether it lived up to the expectations that a show like Creature Commandos should have, and for the most part, I really do think it did that, and that's why I'm going to give Creature Commandos an 87. It's not amazing, but it's quite good, and not only myself, but most fans who decided to check it out enjoyed it, and when it comes to the overall performance/viewership, I do truly think that it did about as well as you could have hoped. No, it's not a smash hit, but if anyone was expecting the show to break out and be a cornerstone of the DCU going forward, you were just simply lying to yourself. Also, I know weighing it at 10% may seem a little small, as it was one of the only 3 projects released this last year, but honestly, TV animation is sadly just not nearly as important as things like the movies as well as live action TV. Just look at what the MCU does and how important their animated series are. Additionally, the next project we're going to talk about was by far and away the most important project of the year for the DCU, and it is weighted at a vastly higher percentage to any other category for this grading process, and that of course is going to be Superman, coming in at a whopping 50%. Now, I know some may say 50% is a bit extreme for one singular project, but honestly, I think I could probably argue for it being higher considering how necessary it was for the DCU to get this movie right. Creature Commandos and Peacemaker Season 2 could have been 2 of the greatest seasons of television of all time, but if Superman were to come out and be an absolute flop with fans and critics alike, for lack of better words, the DCU would have been absolutely fucked. Now, of course, I'm sure there would have been some way for James Gunn and Peter Safran to recover from a bad Superman movie and for the DCU to continue for years to come, but it would have been extremely unlikely. James Gunn needed to get this character and movie right, and for the most part, he did exactly that. Now, no way am I saying Superman is a perfect movie, because it absolutely is not. There are plenty of issues with the movie, and there are some people who absolutely despise this take on the character, but for the most part, it did really well with critics and audiences, and I think it's a great starting point for the DCU and set a solid foundation. James Gunn was simply never going to win over everybody, and there is still a lot of work to be done when it comes to repairing the brand of DC in the eyes of the average moviegoer, and of course, Superman cannot be the peak for the DCU, but I do think it is a great improvement on the last half decade of the DCEU, and it shows shows that if you make better movies, more people will come. People do not have superhero fatigue, in my opinion. They have bad movie fatigue. And when the general audience saw a trailer for the DCEU, a lot of them just assumed, oh, that's probably gonna be a pretty bad movie and I'm gonna just save my money. Superman offered a new beginning for the brand, and for those who took the leap and gave DC another opportunity, they seem to have enjoyed themselves for the most part. Not everyone, of course, but the overwhelming majority, and I do expect we will see a pretty big increase in box office for Man of Tomorrow, probably somewhere above 800 million if I had to guess as of right now, as long as the film ends up being good. Now, of course, we do have to talk about the box office for the movie, as it was something that was talked about non-stop before and after the release of the film. $616 million worldwide is certainly nothing to sneeze at, as it was a vast improvement upon a lot of the DCEU, especially towards the end, but I have no doubt that Zaslav and company were most likely expecting more. But honestly, I think it's a solid return. Not a great return, but a solid return for how run into the ground the brand was. This idea that Superman needed to make $1 billion or needed to make $850 million to be considered a success is just insane to me. Yes, of course, that would have been great. You are always going to hope for more box office. That's just the nature of the business. But for Superman, the overall goal should have been to make a profit and just help repair the brand of DC, which was going to be a multi-project endeavor, as you're not going to fix the overall brand image of DC in the eyes of the average moviegoer with one singular movie. DC needs to prove that they can provide quality over a long, consistent period for multiple years before they really start to gain any real momentum towards anything like the previous MCU, which is something that I don't know if we're ever going to see from any studio ever again. And when it comes to that question of profitability, not only was Superman profitable, but it made a good chunk of change. In the future, there is no question that the DCU is going to have to do even better at the box office, especially when it comes to characters like Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, and things like the Justice League. But I do think that requires some momentum, and that momentum will only be achieved by stringing together a run of good projects. And that's exactly what the MCU did. It did not start out by delivering billion-dollar movies. Now, of course, there was a billion-dollar movie in Phase 1 when it comes to the Avengers. However, the Avengers did so well because of the foundation that was set by the movies before it, which showed that the MCU movies were a good time, and it got overall audience interest into these movies, and it helped set up the Avengers for success. And when it comes to DC, that was nowhere near the case. The overall brand image was an absolute mess, and just thinking about my own personal friends and family, I know a lot of people who saw pretty much all of the MCU movies, especially leading up to Endgame, but when you talk to them about DC, if it didn't feature Batman or the Joker, they did not give a shit. And that was something that Superman was never going to be able to fix in one movie. It's going to take time, and that's why I honestly think that Superman's box office total of $616 million is a very solid start for the DCU, considering it is profitable. Now, if Superman had a much higher budget and ended up losing money for the studio, then we would definitely be having a different conversation, because I do think when we're talking about not only the superhero movies, but movies in general, it's really important to take the overall budget and profitability into consideration, because next year we're going to have a movie like Clayface, which I would be surprised if Clayface makes over $300 million worldwide. But with a $40 million budget, if that's what it actually has, that could be still a really successful movie at something like $250 million or even $200 million. And based on the budget of Superman and everything that we have heard, Superman did make not only a little bit of money, but it made a good amount of money. That's why I do think it's very solid. And when it comes to formulating the overall grade for Superman when taking into account things like box office and the overall reception, I'm going to give it a 92, which equates to a B+ letter grade. No, James Gunn did not make a perfect superhero movie, but it was a damn good one that was the first true success for DC outside of the Batman and Joker since probably Aquaman in 2018. And it was a phenomenal introduction to a brand new DC cinematic universe and set a strong foundation for future projects to build off of. The project which of course followed Superman was Peacemaker Season 2, and this is the grade that is going to benefit the most from the fact that we are putting a larger focus on overall audience reception instead of just my own personal opinion, because if it was just my own personal opinion, the grade would definitely be worse. I was immensely excited for Peacemaker Season 2, as I was a huge fan of the first season, but man, was I disappointed with what we got for Season 2. And no, it's not because of the finale and the lack of some sort of cameo fest that it seemed like a lot of people wanted to see. And of course, if you do say anything bad about Peacemaker Season 2, that's a reason a lot of people will throw in your face, well, you're just hating because you didn't get to see Booster Gold or Blue Beetle, and that is not the point. Yes, the finale did suck, but it wasn't because we didn't get some sort of cameos. But overall, my opinion is so low on Peacemaker Season 2 is because Season 1 was was better in almost every single way. The emotion, the story, the villains, the action, the comedy, the music, and even the supporting characters were all just flat out better in season 1 in my opinion. And I'll admit, I do think my overall negativity around the season is probably a little bit due to the fact that I just had so much higher of expectations. Peacemaker season 2 is certainly not awful, nor is it even close to one of the worst seasons of DC television I've ever seen. And there are a good amount of people out there that did really enjoy Peacemaker season 2, or at least did enjoy the season up until the finale, which I do think was an absolute failure. And I know a lot of people who did enjoy the season absolutely did despise that finale. And when you screw up a finale, that does kind of tarnish the overall reputation of the season. But again, there are people that enjoy it, so it's not like it's some awful travesty of a project in terms of overall reception. Viewership, on the other hand, though, it's really hard to argue anything positive for it. Even though Peacemaker season 2 did start off really well, the finale for Peacemaker season 2 did have less viewers than the finale of season 1, and that's never a trend you want to see, and does suggest that some interest was lost. So it's not going to be getting any extra bonus points for at least exposing the DCU to a lot of people. Honestly, it's probably a good thing that it didn't have all that much viewership, especially when it's a project that really isn't that amazing. So for the overall final grade, I'm going to be giving Peacemaker season 2 a 77, which equates to a D+ letter grade. That may be a little harsh, but honestly, for a show that didn't help grow the brand and wasn't really all that amazingly received and ended on a really sour note, I think that's a pretty fair grade to give it. If you disagree, please let me know in the comments. I would love to hear your perspective. Even if you adamantly disagree with me, I am all for disagreement as long as we're willing to do it in a respectful manner. Disagreement makes all of us better, I think, especially when it comes to honing our own opinions and perspectives. So please, if I'm being too harsh or maybe I'm being too positive, let me know. The next category is the development of future projects, and this is an area that I definitely think we could debate a lot about, considering I think you could take this in a lot of different directions. If you are someone who follows a lot of the major leakers when it comes to things like Marvel and DC, you could come to the conclusion that it's actually an area that the DCU has struggled quite a bit with, as there have been a few projects that have really struggled to get off the ground behind the scenes, like Waller, The Authority, The Brave and the Bold, and even a project that was not a part of the original slate announcement, but was one that seemingly was gearing up to film even maybe this past year, that of course being Sergeant Rock. If you choose to listen to James Gunn, it certainly seems like a lot of the drama has been overblown by leakers and rumors, and there is still some positive momentum on those projects that I just mentioned. So it kind of comes down to the eye of the beholder and who you want to trust. But one positive thing that we do know as of right now is it sounds like a lot of the projects that are set to come out in 2026 have had a really nice and smooth production process, and it seems like a lot of the chatter coming from leakers and reporters suggests that Gunn and company are extremely confident in the projects that are coming out next year. Now, some of you may say, of course, Gunn and company are going to be positive, but we've been in this era of social media far too long to be that naive. If a studio is not confident about a project, we will absolutely know, because there's already going to be finger pointing before the movie comes out. Now, just because James Gunn and company are confident about said projects, that doesn't mean they'll be good either. Look at The Flash in 2023, but it is nice to know that there isn't any extra drama behind the scenes that might be affecting some of the projects that we are getting next year. I do think that the number of projects that we are getting in 2026 is a little low compared to what James Gunn and Peter Safran have said they envision for DC Studios, but as a grader, I'm just not really going to ding them for that, because I absolutely do not want DC Studios to just start rushing out projects so they can meet some sort of quota that they set a couple of years back. I will say though, when looking towards the future, I am a little bit worried about 2027, as I do think they might be a little bit behind, and it's possible that in 2027, when it comes to DCU specific projects, we might even get less than what we are getting in 2026. Again, there's a lot of time for things to change, but as of right now, the only project with a set release date in 2027 is Man of Tomorrow. Yes, there is the Batman 2, but that of course is outside of the DCU as of right now. There are certainly other projects that the DCU is putting a priority on and could potentially make a 2027 release, but production has to start ramping up really soon, as you are starting to run out of time. For example, I know a lot of people, including myself, have speculated about the potential of a Wonder Woman release in 2027, but if that's to happen, things really need to start ramping up, and we'd probably be hearing a lot more information about that movie in like January or February, and at the latest, they'd have to probably start filming that movie in fall of 2026, and that'd be a pretty quick turnaround compared to things like Superman and what Man of Tomorrow, as well as even a project like the Batman, are doing with their respective release dates. They're giving themselves a much wider window between shooting the film and actually releasing it. But based on the information we know, there's not even even a finished script for Wonder Woman, nor is there a director attached to actually direct this film, so I don't think that's probably going to be the project that maybe goes alongside Man of Tomorrow when it comes to the theatrical releases. I'm sure there are other projects that are currently in production that we don't know about. They may already have finished scripts and directors attached, so we're just going to have to wait and see. And when it comes to TV, it does seem like there's a little bit more traction on other projects that could definitely meet a 2027 release. For example, there's projects like Creature Commandos Season 2, the Booster Gold series, the Jimmy Olsen series, as well as something like Mr. Miracle, that all do seem like they could meet a 2027 release. So I'm sure it'll figure itself out for 2027. And let's be honest, it's very likely that before Zaslav and company were going to give approval for a bunch of new projects for DC Studios, they needed to see that DC Studios could deliver on a project like Superman. So I think 2028 is probably the year where we're going to see probably closer to maybe 3 movies and like 2 live action series and an animated series for the DCU, but we'll grade that when it comes to that point. For 2025, I just think it's a good step in the direction for DC to have projects that don't seem to have a lot of drama behind the scenes. It seems like there is development of future projects with creatives being attached to said projects. So for the overall grade, I'm going to give it an 85, which is a C+. Now finally, let's talk about the hype/vibes category, which comes in at a very small 5%. And this is definitely the most subjective category, as there's really no way to quantify it, as I am literally just grading the vibes of the DCU as of right now. And I'll be honest, I think there's a lot of hope and excitement for the projects we are getting in 2026, and I think there's a lot of excitement for a project like Man of Tomorrow. And specifically when Brainiac was announced, I saw a lot of chatter about that, as that's a character that a lot of people have wanted to see. But Peacemaker Season 2 was definitely a hit on the reputation of James Gunn, and the verdict is still out on the DCU. We simply need more data points, and something like hype takes a long time to build. Also, I don't think it helps that some of the projects that we're getting over the next couple of years focus on characters that are not all that exciting to those who do not follow DC. And hell, even if you're a big DC fan, I know there's a lot of people out there who are not excited for things like a Clayface movie or possibly a Jimmy Olsen TV series. Now, they may really enjoy those projects when they come out, but it's not like there's some massive event people are counting down the days for or constantly talking about. It's not like if there was a Justice League movie on the horizon where a lot of people would be speculating, you know, what is James gonna do? Who are gonna be the Justice League members? Who's gonna be the villain? Movies like that just generate a lot more chatter and a lot more just social media buzz. I will say though, I am definitely one of the people that is counting down the days for Clayface, because I cannot wait to see what they're going to do with that movie, and I really do have some high expectations. So it's a bit of a mixed bag, but when we do talk about specifically the work that the DCU did in the first year when it comes to overall generating hype and improving the vibes around DC, I definitely think that the brand is in a better spot than it was a year ago, and there is certainly more hype for the DCU after the success of a project like Superman, and there's more talk about the DCU now than there was the DCEU a couple of years back. So for an overall final score, because it's not like the DCU is the talk of the town and there's so much excitement around the DCU, but it is in a better spot, I'm going to give it an 83. So finally, when we factor in all of these scores and the weights for the specific categories, we get an 86.6, which would be a B-. Now, you could round it up to an 87, and that would be the low end of a B on my grading scale, which is just the grading scale I had in high school. However, now, I want to know, what grade would you give the DCU's first year? Is my grade way off? Please let me know in the comments. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all in another video.